Well, welcome back to CADease.com's AutoCAD 2011 series of tutorials. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about making your drawings more precise by using AutoCAD's object snaps, or O-snaps, as they're called. Basically, AutoCAD's object snaps are what helps make your drawings more precise. Without using object snaps, you'd need to know the exact location or the exact points within your drawing that you would like to draw objects to or draw from, or where you'd like to locate objects as you're drawing. With object snaps, we're able to draw relative to other objects, which is traditionally the way that we draw anyway. Is you draw a line and then you draw another line from the end point of that line, a specific distance to the right or whatever, or from the center of a circle to the center of another circle, or whatever the case may be. Object snaps allow you to do that with infinite precision, meaning that it's exact. It's 2 points from one endpoint to another endpoint will be exactly on endpoints. There's no crossing, there's no gaps, and O-snaps are a must for any AutoCAD user. You've got to learn how these work, and you've got to use them. If you don't, you're going to drive yourself crazy because measurements are going to be off, lines aren't going to be as long as you think they are, or the way they look on the screen. You've got to use these object snaps to make your drawing exactly precise. There's really no other way around it. So let's take a look at object snaps and how they work. I'm just going to draw a couple of lines here. I'm going to, real quick, just so you know, one quick way to turn on, to make drawings go exactly up and down or exactly left to right is using your ortho. If you hit your F8 key, or you can go down here to your little box, this little box right here, that's your ortho button. F8 key on your keyboard, or clicking that, will turn ortho on. You'll notice on my command line it turns it on. It's a real quick way to just draw 90-degree lines, or move objects or copy objects exactly to the right or left or up and down. So you'll find me kind of all the time hitting my F8 key, turning it on or turning it off. It's just a real quick way, and it's kind of an old habit of drawing using this ortho. But anyway, so I'm going to turn my ortho on. I'm just going to draw a line from this point. I'm just going to pick another point right here, say, and then I ended that line command. I'm going to start another line over here. I'm going to pick here, and let's say I just go to right here and hit enter. Now I'm going to turn my ortho off, and I'm going to draw a line. Let's say I wanted to draw a line from the end point of this line to the end point of this line. Now obviously I could start my line command and I could zoom in and I could pick right here and then I could pick right here, right? And it looks pretty good, doesn't it? Until you start zooming in and you realize, goodness, I'm off. And if I zoom in even further, we'll probably find, well, maybe I was pretty good, but that line either crosses or it doesn't exactly touch that other line, one of the two. Well, with object snaps, what we're able to do is we're able to draw exactly from the end point of one line to the end point of another, or exactly from the center point of a circle or the tangent of a circle or whatever. So this is how this works. I'm going to start my line command, and anytime, now remember this, anytime AutoCAD is asking me to specify a point within my drawing. Notice when I start my line command, it's asking me to specify the first point. After I start my line command to pick my first point, it's going to ask me to specify my second point. Anytime AutoCAD is asking me to specify a point within my drawing, I can use object snaps. Now, I've started my line commands asking me for my first point. And again, instead of just picking anywhere up here close to the end point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my Shift key and then my right mouse button, and it's going to bring up this nice little window. And these are my object snaps. Now up here, these get into a little bit more complicated object snaps, and we can discuss those later. We're not going to get into 3D O snaps right now. But here's the ones that you're going to be using all the time. Endpoint, midpoint, endpoint of a line, midpoint of a line, midpoint of an arc. Intersection, obviously where two arcs or two lines or two circles cross. Apparent intersection, we'll get into that, and extension we'll get into later. Center point, that's the center point, the exact center point of a circle or the exact center point of an arc. Quadrant, tangent, perpendicular, parallel, you can read these. Node, insert, that's if you had a block and you wanted to, we'll get into blocks later, but that's the insertion point of a block. Nearest, none, and then of course your O-snap settings. We'll get into settings in just a minute. But in this case, I want to use the endpoint. So remember, I've started my line command. I held down my Shift key, I click my right mouse button. This menu pops up. Now I'm just going to pick on endpoint. I pick endpoint. Now notice on my command line, AutoCAD's okay. AutoCAD says, okay, you started the line command. Specify the first point. Well, instead of just picking arbitrarily, I hit my OSnap endpoint, and now it's saying endpoint of what? Well, what I need to do is just move my cursor anywhere close to the endpoint of this line, and you'll notice the little green square pop up. That square is an icon that tells me that if I were to pick right now, it's going to snap to the endpoint of that line. Now, if I were to pull down here or move my cursor down here, notice my cursor is now closer to the endpoint of this line at the bottom. So now my icon, or my endpoint icon, is showing the endpoint of the line down at the very bottom. So just by moving closer to one end of a line or the other, that little icon will change. And if I were to pick when that icon is appearing, such as right now, I can just pick anywhere I want to, as long as I see that icon. And what's going to happen is that line, or the first point of my line, is going to be at exactly the endpoint that I just specified. So instead of me having to try and get as close as I can with my eye, all I need to use is my endpoint object snap and pick close to the endpoint of that line as long as I see that square icon. And now I know that I've started my line at exactly the endpoint of that line. Now I know it probably sounds like I'm overstating this exact thing, but it can't be overstated. You really need to know how to use these object snaps to keep your drawings extremely or exactly precise. You don't need to be close to precise. You need to be exactly precise when you're drawing in AutoCAD. Okay, so now it's asking me for my next point, right? I've started the line exactly at this endpoint. Now my next endpoint, again, like I said before, anytime AutoCAD is asking you to specify a point within your drawing, you can use an object snap. So what I want to do is I want to hit the end point, the exact endpoint of this object or this line. So I'm going to hit my Shift key, hold down my Shift key, hit my right mouse button. It brings up my object snap window. I'm going to go over here and click endpoint. Now it brings me back to my drawing window. Now as I get close to the endpoint of this line, all I need to do is pick, and I know that I've drawn exactly to that endpoint. Okay? It's that simple. Now I'm going to hit enter and just get out of that line command. And let's talk about a couple of these other object snaps. Let's say I want to draw a line from the midpoint of this line to the midpoint of this line. Well, all I need to do is start my line command again, hold down my Shift key, hit my right mouse button, go down here to midpoint. When I click on that, notice when I get close to this line, a little triangle shows up. Well, the triangle is the icon that you'll see when you're getting ready to pick the midpoint of an object or a line. So all I need to do is get close enough to this line where I see that icon pop up. Now I just hit my pick button, and now I know that I've started that line at exactly the midpoint of that line. Now AutoCAD's asking me, okay, where's your next point? I'm going to hold down my Shift key, my right mouse button. I'm going to click on midpoint again, go over to this line, and I can pick anywhere I want to as long as I see that icon. And I know that I've drawn my second point to exactly the midpoint of this line right here. Okay? So that's how the endpoint and midpoint object snaps work. Now there's other object snaps obviously that you can use. You saw them in the menu. Let's take a look at some of those. I'm going to start my line command, hit my Shift key, hold down my Shift key, hit my right mouse button. This time I'm going to click on intersection. If I click on intersection, if I just get close to the intersection of these two lines, notice I get that little X right there. That's telling me that if I were to pick, I'm going to start that line at exactly that intersection. So I'm just going to pick right there, and then this time let's say I want to go to the midpoint over here. Midpoint, oops, I grabbed the wrong one, didn't I? Midpoint, always keep your eye on your command line. It'll tell you what you're missing. So now it's looking for the midpoint. Go over here close to the midpoint. I'm going to make my pick, and I've gone exactly to the midpoint of that line. Okay, that's midpoint. So we've gone over endpoint, midpoint, intersection. We'll go over these in a minute. Let's look at some object snaps for circles. the center point. Actually, you know what? Before we do center point, let's look at this other object snap right here, perpendicular. And you can probably guess what this is going to do. AutoCAD's asking me for my first point. Let's say I want to start a line somewhere out here in space. I'm going to pick out here in space. But I want it to end exactly perpendicular to this line. I don't know where that point is on this line, but I do know that I want it to be at a 90-degree angle to this vertical line. So what I'm going to do, and it's asking me for my next point, I'm going to bring up my Object Snap menu, Shift key, right mouse button, and I'm going to go down here to perpendicular, click on that. Look, notice my command line is saying, okay, my next point is going to be perpendicular to what? Well, I come over here, move my cursor over here to this line. Notice I've got this different icon shown up here against this line. And as long as I see that icon, I can pick anywhere I want. And my next point is going to be exactly perpendicular to this line. So I've drawn this line from here, somewhere arbitrarily out in space, to this line at exactly 90 degrees, or exactly perpendicular. Works great with these, perfectly horizontal, perfectly vertical lines, but also works great when you have angled lines like this. So let's start my line command. I'm going to pick out here in space. Now I want to draw a line perpendicular to this line right here. Well, gosh, who knows where that's going to be? So what I can do, Shift key, right mouse button, go to perpendicular, and just pick anywhere along this line that I can see that icon, and boom, right there. Now I know that I've drawn this line exactly perpendicular to this line right here. Okay. If you're ever clicking around and you accidentally click on an object and you don't have any command going, you see your highlighted line here with these dots. Those are called grips, and we're going to get into grips in just a couple of minutes. So if you ever see that, just hit escape a couple times, and that'll undo those grips or let go of those grips, and then or deactivate that object, and then you can move on and start your other commands again. So that's perpendicular, endpoint, midpoint, and intersection. Some of the other ones, center, quadrant, and tangent. Before we get into those, let's end this tutorial because we're running up into 15 minutes. Let's end this tutorial, and in the next tutorial, we'll talk about these other object snaps that relate to arcs and circles, the center, quadrant, and tangent, and then a couple of other things as well. So that's the end of this tutorial. I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you in just a minute.